Okay, so today we're diving into a topic that's got, well, it seems like everyone's talking about it, the UK's Dangerous Dogs Act.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot button issue.
You sent us this documentary that really gets into the nitty-gritty of it all, especially when it comes to pit bulls.
Right.
And I gotta say, some of the stuff in there is pretty eye-opening, to say the least.
It really makes you think.
It does. So, for our listeners who maybe haven't seen the documentary, can you give us a little background on this Dangerous Dogs Act? What's it all about?
Well, the UK's Dangerous Dogs Act has been around for a while now.
Since when?
Yeah.
The 90s.
Yep, 1991 to be exact. It was enacted in response to, well, there was a perceived rise in dog attacks happening at the time.
Right, and that's obviously a huge concern.
And there was this one very high-profile case, a young girl, Rakshana Khan, who was really badly injured in a pit bull attack.
Oh, that's awful.
It was just a horrible situation, and it really captured the public's attention. You know, people were understandably fearful and demanding action.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
So the Dangerous Dogs Act was kind of a direct response to that climate of fear and this urge to do something to prevent these sorts of attacks from happening again.
So it sounds like lawmakers were under a lot of pressure to act quickly.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something the documentary does a good job of highlighting. There was this real sense of urgency surrounding the whole issue.
Okay, but now here's where it gets interesting, right? The documentary, it kind of questions whether this Dangerous Dogs Act, with its focus on specific breeds like pit bulls, whether that was actually the right way to go about it.
Yeah, and that's been the debate all along.
Because, I mean, you can see both sides, can't you? On the one hand, you have people saying, look, we got to do something to protect people, especially kids, from these powerful dogs.
And that's a valid concern, for sure. No one wants to see anyone get hurt, especially not a child.
Right, exactly. But then on the other hand, you have people saying, wait a minute, isn't this a bit like, I don't know, judging a book by its cover?
And that's the crux of the issue, isn't it? Is it fair to single out an entire breed based on the actions of a few? And the documentary really digs into the statistics on this.
Oh, yeah, the numbers. What'd they say again?
Well, when it comes to attacks on strangers, pit bulls are actually way down on the list.
Really? I would have thought.
Yeah, a lot of people are surprised to hear this.
They'd be higher up.
They're 19th, to be exact.
19th?
Yeah.
So, like, what? Are poodles more likely to attack you than a pit bull?
Well, not poodles necessarily, but the documentary actually points to a rather unexpected culprit when it comes to bites Jack Russell Terriers.
Jack Russells. Seriously, those little...
Yeah, statistically, they're much more prone to biting than pit bulls.
That's wild. You'd never think, looking at them, those tiny things.
It really throws a wrench in that whole dangerous breed assumption, doesn't it?
For sure. I mean, you practically need a stepladder to get to their knees.
It all goes back to that nature versus nurture debate. Is a dog inherently dangerous because of its breed, or is it all about how it's raised, trained, and socialized by its owner? And that's a question the documentary spends a lot of time exploring, especially through the stories of people who have been directly affected by the Dangerous Dogs Act.
Like with Reese, right? His story really stuck with me.
Yeah, Reese's story is a powerful example of how this legislation can sometimes have unintended consequences. He's this young man who's banned from owning dogs because of a past incident with a pit bull.
And I think he even said it wasn't even his pit bull, right?
Right. It was a friend's dog, if I remember correctly.
Just something like that, yeah.
But anyway, because of that incident, he's not allowed to have any dogs, which you might think would make him, wary of them.
Yeah, you'd think so.
But instead, it seems like the ban kind of pushed him in the opposite direction.
Because now he's involved in the underground breeding of pit bulls, right?
Exactly. He talks about how there's this whole underground network and how a pit bull puppy can fetch a much higher price than other similar breeds because of the ban.
It's like the law inadvertently created this whole black market for pit bulls.
It's supply and demand, I guess. When you restrict something, it often becomes more desirable, even if it's just because it's forbidden.
It's like that old saying, forbidden fruit, right?
Yeah.
And then you have someone like Louisa who has a completely different story. Hers is heartbreaking.
Louisa's story just gets to you.
It does. She's a recovering addict, and she credits her dog, Charlie, who might be a pit bull mix, with helping her stay clean.
The bond between them is so clear, You can tell that Charlie is more than just a pet to her. He's like her lifeline.
And yet she's constantly living with this fear that Charlie could be taken away, or worse, euthanized, simply because of his breed.
And she might not even know for sure if he is a pit bull. It's the uncertainty of it all that must be so difficult.
Yeah, that constant worry hanging over your head.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you wonder if these breed-specific bans are really the answer if they're causing so much anxiety and fear, even for responsible owners like Louisa.
It's a tough situation all around. And it really makes you think, are we punishing dogs for just existing, even if they haven't shown any signs of aggression? Is that truly fair?
I don't know. Tough questions, for sure.
And that's what makes this whole topic so complex, right? There are so many factors to consider, so many different perspectives.
Absolutely. And speaking of perspectives, we're going to hear from some experts in the field in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, we'll delve into the debate surrounding dangerous dogs and what those who work with them every day have to say about it all.
So stick around, folks. This conversation is just getting started.
You know, picking up on that question of fairness, Louisa's story, it really gets to the heart of this whole debate about dangerous dogs.
It does make you wonder, is it really fair to label an entire breed as dangerous?
It's a big question, and the documentary, to its credit, it doesn't shy away from that. They bring in some pretty compelling voices, experts in the field who say, hold on a second, let's not jump to conclusions.
And one who really stuck out to me was Ian McParland, right? Former police officer. He actually established a specialized dog unit, so this is someone who knows his stuff.
Oh, absolutely. When it comes to dog behavior, especially aggression, he's seen it all.
And I was surprised, honestly, because you'd think someone with his background, right, dealing with those high-stakes situations, you'd think he'd be all on board with breed-specific legislation. But he's not, is he?
No, not at all. In fact, he's quite vocal about it. He firmly believes that most dog bite incidents are preventable. It all boils down to, and this is a recurring theme, responsible ownership.
It always comes back to that, doesn't it?
It really does. And McParland, he breaks it down so well. He says any dog, I don't care what the breed is, any dog can become a problem in the wrong hands.
So true. It's about, training, socialization, recognizing those signs if your dog is stressed or agitated.
All of that. Understanding their needs, giving them enough exercise, mental stimulation. It's common sense, really, but it makes a world of difference.
Right, because a bored dog or a stressed dog, that's when trouble can start. And the documentary, to really hammer home that point about responsible ownership, they bring up this really sad case, Jade Anderson, the 14-year-old girl who was killed by dogs belonging to a friend.
Yeah, a tragic case, and one that really challenges the whole premise of breed-specific legislation.
Because the dogs involved, they weren't banned breeds. Right?
Exactly.
Wow.
They weren't pit bulls. They weren't on that list of dangerous dogs. The documentary, I think, highlights that detail for a reason.
It completely flips the script, doesn't it? It shows that just banning certain types of dogs, it doesn't automatically make everyone safer.
It's a Band-Aid solution, really. And the documentary goes into some of the details of that case, and it's heartbreaking because it seems like there were so many red flags.
Like what?
Well, the dogs, they were rarely walked, apparently underfed, and get this, there were even warning signs about their aggression, like posted on social media.
Oh, come on. People were actually warning others about these dogs, and it still happened.
It's a horrible reminder that sometimes, even when the signs are there, people don't take them seriously enough. And tragically, it costs that young girl her life.
So sad. But it makes you think, right? If banning breeds isn't the answer, then what is? What are the alternatives? Didn't the documentary explore some of those?
They did, yeah. One that comes up a lot is a dog licensing system.
Dog licensing, so like getting a driver's license, but for owning a dog.
Exactly. The idea is owners would have to prove they know the basics of dog care, training, responsible ownership, all of that, before they're allowed to have a dog.
Okay, I can see the logic there, at least in theory. But how do you even begin to enforce something like that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the documentary, they don't shy away from those practical concerns. Who's going to administer these licenses? What would the criteria be? How do you make sure people are actually complying? It's a logistical nightmare.
Because let's be real, people get dogs all the time without going through breeders or any kind of official channels. It happens.
All the time. So, yeah, dog licensing, it's a nice idea on paper, but the reality of it gets complicated quickly. But one development that the documentary does point to as a step in the right direction, at least in the UK, is the mandatory microchipping of all dogs.
Oh, right. That's a thing now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's mandatory in the UK, and a lot of other places are considering it. And I think it's seen as a positive step because it promotes accountability.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. If a dog is involved in an attack, or even if it's just found wandering around lost and confused, the owner can be easily identified.
Okay, so it's not a cure-all, but it creates a trail of responsibility.
Exactly. Makes it a lot harder for someone to just dump a dog when it becomes inconvenient, which, sadly, we know happens far too often.
Way too often. But I guess what it boils down to is that technology alone can't solve a problem that's rooted in, well, human behavior.
Right, and that's the message the documentary really drives home. We need a fundamental shift in how we view and approach dog ownership.
It's about, I don't know, going beyond just seeing a dog as a pet, right? Recognizing that they are living, breathing creatures with their own needs and complexities.
And recognizing that owning a dog, any dog, is a responsibility, not a right. And it's a responsibility that should be taken seriously.
For sure. And maybe instead of spending so much time arguing about which breeds are inherently dangerous, we should be looking at the bigger picture here.
100%. Ultimately, it's the dogs who often pay the price for irresponsible ownership, whether it's through neglect, abuse, or even just a lack of understanding.
And that actually leads into, I think, one of the most thought-provoking points that the documentary makes. They ask, it's a really pointed question. They say, is the Dangerous Dogs Act actually more about social control than public safety? Social control, huh? That's a pretty loaded term, you know.
It is. It makes you think about the motivations behind this law, right? Like, is it really just about keeping people safe from dangerous dogs, or is there something else going on there?
In the documentary, they don't shy away from those questions, do they? I mean, they even bring up this statement from Kenneth Baker.
Who was Home Secretary at the time, right? Back when the law was passed.
Yeah, him. And he basically admitted that he didn't want to upset the Green Welly Brigade by targeting certain breeds.
The Green Welly Brigade. It's an interesting choice of words, isn't it?
It is. So, for those of us who aren't up on our British slang, what does that even mean? Green Welly Brigade.
Well, think about it. Green Wellies, the countryside, a certain demographic. It's kind of a coded way of talking about class, isn't it?
So they were worried about alienating a certain segment of society, even if it meant, I don't know, not addressing a potential safety issue.
It definitely raises those questions, doesn't it? And it makes you wonder how much of this law was really about public safety versus, like they said, social control, trying to maintain a certain order, maybe even reinforcing existing power structures.
It's a bit unsettling when you think about it that way. I mean, it makes you realize that even laws that are framed as being for the greater good, there are often other factors at play.
Absolutely. And I think the documentary does a good job of highlighting that because at the end of the day, regardless of the intent behind it, the Dangerous Dogs Act has had a real impact on people's lives.
Especially certain communities, right?
Exactly. And it's often those who are already marginalized who end up bearing the brunt of these kinds of policies.
So it seems like what we're left with is, well, more questions than answers, really.
In a way, yes, but I think that's the point of a documentary like this, isn't it? To challenge our assumptions, to make us think critically about these complex issues.
And maybe to start having more honest conversations about the role that things like bias and prejudice, whether it's conscious or unconscious, play in shaping our laws and our society.
Because if we really want to create a safer, more just world for both humans and animals, we have to be willing to acknowledge those uncomfortable truths.
Absolutely. So where does that leave us? What's the takeaway for someone who's just finished watching this documentary, their head probably spinning with all this information?
I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of responsible dog ownership. That's something we can all agree on. It's about educating ourselves, understanding our dogs, and treating them with the respect and care they deserve.
And recognizing that it's not about demonizing certain breeds. It's about creating a culture where all dogs are treated with kindness and understanding, or where everyone feels safe.
Exactly. And hopefully through education, empathy, and a commitment to responsible ownership, we can move towards a future where tragedies like the ones we've discussed today are far less likely to occur.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, folks, there you have it. Another deep dive, another set of complex issues to unpack. A big thank you to everyone for joining us on this journey. And be sure to tune in next time for another thought-provoking conversation.